皆様、本日は日曜日の朝にもかかわらず、
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for attending our online event, Understanding Advanced Learners with John Hopkins Center for Talented Youth. We appreciate your attending on Sunday morning. I will be your MC for today. I am Ayako Hattori from the General Incorporated Association Education Beyond. We will be offering today's event in Japanese and English. We have simultaneous interpretation, so please go to the bottom of your screen and click on the globe symbol. Choose the language of your preference. Questions from the audience will be through a platform called Slido rather than the Zoom chat function. We will be explaining how to use this platform later on. And now we would like to explain today's program. Our three board members will speak about Education Beyond's impact and the mission of our institute. From around 9:15, from the U.S. Johns Hopkins University Center for Talented Youth, CTY, we have a guest speaker, Executive Director, Dr. Virginia Roach. She will be speaking about advanced learners. From around 9:30, we plan on having a Q&A session. Later on, from 9:40, we will have a panel discussion with parents of advanced learners. We will also have a Q&A session from around 10. Lastly, we will wrap up with a message about Education Beyond's upcoming events. We will be concluding at around 10:30 p.m. And now we would like to explain how to send in questions. In today's event, we will be using a platform called Slido to accept your questions. We have two sets of Q&As. Questions for Dr. Virginia Roach from CTY will be through the QR code on the top. You can also go to the Slido website and input this number 3965032. The questions for the parents panel discussion can be linked through the QR code on the bottom. Or please access the Slido website and input these 7 digits, 2249914. On the Slido platform, you will be able to like other questions that have already been sent in. If there are questions that have a lot of smile marks and like responses, those questions will come to the top of the list. If you find that the question you would like to ask has already been input, please use the like mark. Thank you again for your patience. Without further ado, we would like to begin our event. We will invite the 3 board members from Education Beyond to introduce themselves and also speak about our mission. Paul-san, Lin-san, and Michael-san, please.
すいません。おはようございます。小林凛です。ホストがビデオを停止したため、ビデオを開始できませんということで、なぜか自分のできました。失礼いたしました。ごめんなさい。
Excuse me, just some technical issues. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah, maybe I will start. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Education Beyond's first ever online event. My name is Paul Lee, and I'm one of the 3 board directors at Education Beyond. Given today's event is about advanced learners, and we're here to share experiences and understanding about them, maybe I will start with my own personal experience with advanced learners. And my personal interest of advanced learners started with my eldest son, who has always complained about school being boring from as young as 5 to 6 years old when he can start telling us about his experience. Now, while most parents and teachers may think that, oh, the child feels that school is being easy or boring, is being lucky, as you will hear from our guest speakers from Johns Hopkins University's Center of Talented Youth, short for CTYs, you will find that oftentimes it's actually not the case. In fact, they need special care and extra help in order for them to stay motivated in learning. As for my son, when he turned 12, one day he suddenly decided to stop going to school. Fortunately, when our family moved from Tokyo to Hong Kong, when our son was 6 years old, we were introduced to CTY, and he has been attending the CTY summer schools and online classes for several years before he dropped out of school. Eventually, what motivated him to go back, in fact, was the positive experience that he had at CTY. As such, I'm super grateful and excited about Dr. Roach's talk to us about advanced learners today. Next, I'd like to talk about the brief background of Education Beyond and our history with CTY. Since moving to Hong Kong in 2012, I've been a member of CTY's East Asia Advisory Council, and over the years, one question's always stuck in my mind. Why are there not more Japanese students attending the program? In 2017, I worked with CTY to host a reception in Tokyo to introduce CTY to Japanese parents, teachers, and schools. And through this event, I was introduced to the other board of directors of Education Beyond today, Lin-san and Michael-san, for the first time. When I retired and returned to Tokyo last year, the three of us joined together, and given our shared passion in bringing the new experience for advanced learners to Japan, we agreed to work on Education Beyond together. Last but not least, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank you all for taking your precious time on Sunday morning to attend our first ever event. And with that, I would like to pass the mic to Lin-san.
ポールさん、ありがとうございます。改めまして皆様おはようございます。本当に日曜の朝からありがとうございます。
Thank you very much, everyone. I will be attending as a board member for Education Beyond today. You may know me as an entrepreneur who runs an international boarding school in Karuizawa. I'm actually attending today as a mother of two children. I have a son who's a junior high school student and a daughter who is in elementary school. The reason why I became interested in advanced learners is because, similar to Paul-san, my son actually is very unique. And I have actually written about this on social media as well, but when he was maybe 3 or 4 years old, he started to read encyclopedias. He became very interested in elemental symbols. And then he would start to write the internal mechanism.
小3に上がったぐらいから、非常に完璧主義というと、言い方、はい、なんですけども、すごく傾向が強くなって、学校の
He became very much a perfectionist. And ever since, he wanted to prepare well for school. So if he felt he wasn't well prepared, he said he didn't want to go. He disliked it when our plans changed suddenly. So that would happen a lot, and I became very frustrated. And it was at that time that I found out about the CTY program. So my son took the assessment at the end of 2018. He actually scored very well on the assessment, and that really helped my son's self-esteem. In the summer of 2019, when he was in the 4th grade, we went to the CTY summer program in LA. He really came alive during that, and it was as if he became a different person. He became emotionally stable. So I still remember that experience. Now, Paul-san was saying, why aren't there many Japanese students? For CTY currently, the classes and the assessments are all conducted in English, so that becomes a big barrier for many Japanese. Because of my work, we spent 6 months overseas, so my son happened to be able to speak in English. But even back then, I felt that I wish there were more programs like this available for children like my son here in Japan. I also spoke to many of these children and parents, and of course, I realized it's important for their programs to be for parents, for children. But for parents as well, there's an importance in having a community. It's important for educators to also speak about developing classes. So, on this next slide, we have identified the mission for Education Beyond. Our mission is focused on children. We want to create a society in which advanced learner children can maximize their potential. That is our biggest mission. We have 3 visions. We want to create forums where advanced learners can fulfill their learning desires. We want to create a community for parents to exchange information. We also want to partner with school teachers to develop and offer teaching methods that are based on an understanding of advanced learners. Those are the current areas of focus for us. It may take a little bit more time, but we're hoping that we can create this movement here in Japan. And on this slide, we're showing our team. For today's event, the 3 board members are speaking. We started Education Beyond earlier this year, and we have been working hard ever since. We have some of our key members shown here. We have a team of roughly 20 people who are all working as volunteers. Now I'd like to turn it over to Maiko-san, our other board member.
はい、ありがとうございます、リンさん。皆様、はじめまして、Education Beyond の
Thank you very much. I am a board member of Education Beyond, and I am the CEO of Hopkins Corporation. My name is Maiko Todoroki. And after graduating from elementary school, I entered a boarding school in the UK. And I have lived half my life outside of Japan, in the UK, France, Singapore, and about 10 years ago, I came back to Japan. I have 2 kids in elementary school, a son and a daughter. My son, since he was young, he had a very special sensitivity. And he always surprised people around him. For example, when he was small, when he concentrates, no matter how much you talk to him, he wouldn't hear us. He would use the whole room to create something using building blocks. And then he will destroy it again and then start building it again using the whole room. And he would be immersed in such activities for many hours. So the Japanese education requires people to not stick out, to do everything right. And so he didn't really fit into such an education system. So the style is to overcome weaknesses rather than improve what you are good at. And therefore, it was quite tough for him as well as myself. And that's when I met Bin-san and Paul-san. The Johns Hopkins Center for Talented Youth program. I learned about this program, and I heard about this project of bringing that program to Japan. And I hope that we can have such an option here in Japan as well, and that's why I raised my hand to volunteer. So Hopkins is a business that I'm doing, and about 10,000 people every day from 0 years old to 6 years old. We take care of children of that age. But in Japan, there is a lot of care given to children who cannot catch up with school. But there is not much care for the overachievers, for children who are not satisfied to just learn in the regular classroom. And that's how I feel as I look at the children that we took care of. And I believe the people gathered here today for this seminar, maybe you have been told that if your child wants to learn, why don't you send the child to a cram school? Maybe you have been told that several times, but that's not what the child wants. They want to expand what they are good at. They want to explore their curiosities. Are there no options to do that? I believe you have always wondered that. So Education Beyond is where we try to maximize the potential of each child and want to create a society where that can happen. I'm hoping that we can provide you some hints or some hope through our activities. And of course, we have just started, but I hope that we can create such a society together with you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We have heard from 3 board members, as well as a little bit about Education Beyond. Now from CTI, we have Dr. Virginia Roach, Executive Director of CTY. And after her lecture, we will have some time for Q&A. And if you have any questions, please utilize the QR code on the slide, open up Slido, and write in your questions. We understand that Virginia likes sushi, teriyaki, and nori salad, but yes, the floor is yours. Virginia, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm going to share my screen with my slides. So one of the things you might be thinking about is how do these students with advanced talent, how are they? How do they think about themselves in the world? We know that students have many similarities as they start school, but as they grow, their individual potential starts to sprout. Children show potential in many different areas: leadership, athletics, languages, music, and social adaptability. When that potential is nurtured, it blossoms, and those children become civic leaders, professional athletes, diplomats, orchestral conductors, or CEOs. Some children have extraordinary academic potential, and if that potential is not nurtured as they're young and as they're growing up, that potential actually withers and it dies. But when their talent is nurtured, the students are inspired to pursue their intellectual passions and really create the world of tomorrow. So who are these students with academic potential? So they may have learned to talk and read very early in life, earlier than typical children. You've heard that from some of our parents. They may have understood math concepts at a very early age. They may appear to have asynchronous development. That means they may seem to be very mature in, say, speech or reasoning, but not able to write with a pencil or pen. They may not be able to read phonetically and sound a word out, but they can tell you what a word is. And they may appear unusually sensitive to world events or phenomenon because of their awareness and their intellectual capacity. So what are some of the common school behaviors of students with academic potential? It's not necessarily what you think. Many people see these children as children who sit in the front row of the class. They're the first to raise their hand and to answer a question. But as we've just heard, they may be the students who never respond to a question. They may respond with other information than the question that has been asked because they're already thinking much more broadly about the question. They may be frustrated with the question that's being asked and they don't see school has any relevance for them. They also may be too nervous to respond for fear of being wrong. Or they may be sitting in the back of the classroom and not paying attention at all because they don't see the classroom as relevant to what they're doing in their lives and how they think. So why might a typical classroom not be stimulating for these students? One is because the classroom environment is often focused on quantity and not quality. The focus of the curriculum is developed on stereotypic human development stages, but these stages may not hold within a particular discipline or cross-discipline in the areas that our students have talent. So what do I mean by that? Cognitive psychologists have learned that there's typically a sequence to learning something new. And this sequence has 5 different stages. The first stage is the pre-structural stage, and that's when a student knows nothing about a problem. The unistructural stage, the second stage, is when a student understands something about the problem, but may focus only on one aspect or another. The multistructural stage, the third stage, the student can create more complex understanding of a problem by understanding more than one aspect of the problem or link aspects of the problem together. That then moves into the relational stage where students can start to generalize the relation and give a formula or a rule for the specific problem. But then the final stage is the extended abstract stage, and that's where the student can generate new things and go beyond the information that they have received in the instruction to develop new kinds of strategies. So an example like this using elementary mathematics shows the pre-structural stage where 2 plus 2, a student may answer 2 because they don't see those symbols as equating to different quantities. They see it as two different symbols. In the unistructural stage, 3 plus 4, they answer 7, and that is the representation of the value with one answer and closure. So it's one step, they know what the answer is, and they have closure to the problem. Similarly, in multistructural, it still is a particular step, and there's one answer. So 6 times 8 divided by 4, if the student goes through this equation in order, they will figure out what that answer is. And that answer is here represented in terms of n. In the relational stage, students can start to hold a couple of different aspects of the equation in the same place. There's still closure, meaning there's still only one correct answer, but they're able to look at the interrelationship of the items to be able to come up with an answer. But in the extended abstract stage, there's actually not one correct answer. There are many ways a person could solve for this problem, depending on what kinds of functions and what kinds of variables they put into that problem set. So for students who have advanced talent, from a scientific cognitive perspective, well, the typical student is going through all of these stages to learn. A student with advanced talent or academic potential skips over many of those stages. And because they can skip over many of those stages, they can often be in a position in a classroom where they're answering a question that's not even being asked because they're not interested in these lower level stages. Or they already see relationships and want to talk about different kinds of relationships with the question, rather than giving a very specific concrete answer to a very specific concrete question posed by the teacher. So for another example for this, if you think about mathematics, where a student is asked, here is a path, the stepping stone starts with 40, you have to add or subtract to get to 0. And this was an actual item given to 4-year-olds. So in this context, since the 4-year-olds are just learning how to add and subtract, they add 1, then they subtract 1, add 2, subtract 2, add 1, subtract 1, and then they know ultimately if they say 40 minus 40, they get 0. But for my son, who had academic potential at that age, he looked at the same problem, looked at it for a moment, and immediately understood that if he did multiples of 5, he could do the answer. And this is typically what we will see with students with advanced talent. They're able to skip over and see different kinds of innovations and move far beyond what the teacher is talking about. So how do advanced students learn? First of all, they do tend to learn at an accelerated pace, but they're likely also to be very active learners who possess the need for cognitive challenge and willfully engage in effortful cognitive endeavors. So even if they're presented with a fairly simple problem or task, they themselves might make it more complex and more challenging because they want to test themselves. They do have preferences for on-hands approaches that deal with real-world problems because real-world problems often do not have complete closure. They feel more likely motivated when they're driving through a discovery process to come up with an answer themselves to a real world problem. They are not passive consumers of knowledge. So if you think about a traditional classroom where the teacher is lecturing in the front of the classroom and students are taking notes, they don't really respond well to that kind of instruction. What they want is deep understanding of both the details within the information, but also the broader constructs and the concepts and theories that are important as part of that information. So the students with the academic potential are looking for what are the broader principles they can pull out of this discussion? What are the larger theories that they could then use to take that information somewhere else? These students tend to be very good at what we call in education as self-regulation strategies. They know how to manage their own learning process. They know how to pace themselves. They know how to segment and dissect ideas and concepts. And these are things that often we actually are teaching students with advanced talent so that they can accelerate and deepen their learning even more. Once they know those skills, they take off. They are adept at reflecting on their own learning and thinking about how is it I know what I know and how do I learn what I learn. They're very self-aware in their own learning, far more self-aware than the typical child. And that's why they have such little tolerance in many classrooms for rote instruction. They appreciate opportunities to work independently because in that way they know they can challenge themselves to their full potential. And they have the opportunity to work in advanced and abstract ways that they might not necessarily be able to in a full class environment. Advanced learners also tend to be very adept at translating skills acquired in one area to another area of learning and a completely new situation, which is again, that more sophisticated cognitive thinking. They tend to catch patterns and identify hidden generalities of a problem much quicker than the typical student. They appreciate interdisciplinary approaches to learning and like to learn across subjects, and they can make connections outside of the typical boundaries of the disciplines in education. So they can far more quickly make connections between mathematics and geology and archaeology and history. They want opportunities to apply their talents and skills to learn new and be challenged in new ways. And in fact, if they're not challenged, they can start to pull away from the learning environment in a classroom and start to feel alienated from what's going on in their classroom. So those are some very basic aspects of advanced learners. And I'm going to stop sharing from here. And I think we're at the point of taking some questions.
ダージニエさん、ありがとうございました。今まで聞いたことない話が。
Dr. Roach, thank you very much for sharing your presentation. That was a lot of new information for us, and we appreciate your breaking down the definitions of advanced learners in ways that made sense to us. So now we would like to go to our Q&A session. In addition to Dr. Roach, we are joined by Sam, the Senior Director for International Initiatives at CTY. We understand that Sam's son likes the movie My Neighbor Totoro. And now we would like to go to our first question. This is actually one of our top questions that we've received so far. We understand that CTY programs have been developed. They're special because they're based on a learning of advanced learner children, and they're based on research. So what kind of research has CTY used? In what ways are your programs different from others?
So some of the things that I want to describe are some of the characteristics of our programs that are different. And these characteristics are based on the research about students with academic progress, promise, and advanced talent. So first of all, the first thing we do with our students is they are immersed in a classroom with other like-minded students. So this gives them a strong sense of belonging. Many times students who have a great deal of academic potential don't feel like they fit into the classroom. So our students are grouped with other like-minded students. We're also very clear in this context that everyone makes mistakes and that we expect everyone to make mistakes, and that's how we learn. And the reason that's so important is that we do know that for many of our students, they always get it right. They always have the right answer. And that can develop into a concern that a student might be afraid to give an answer in case it would be wrong. So we're very clear to say learning is messy, learning is interactive, and making mistakes is part of the learning process. Pedagogically, we engage students in interactive learning. We use complex real-world problems where there's no correct answer. We ask students to work through the problem. Teacher prompts are related to how to think about a problem, not the solution of the problem. We're asking students how and why, not so much what. Students are asked to make inferences. They're asked to make predictions, make models, construct arguments, engage in independent study to support analysis, and they do this either individually or in a group. Again, we go deeper into the subjects and we explore exceptions to the argument because we want students to grapple with, well, what if your argument puts you in one direction but there is an exception to what you have learned. So we do this with not just merely accelerating, going through the material faster, we're trying to make it more sophisticated. So for instance, we engage students in problem-based learning. We have a problem where a child is sick. So you have a group of students and each one of the students has to start thinking about, all right, what do these symptoms suggest? What do we think? How can we diagnose this student? But then the problem gets even broader because we say, okay, based on what your diagnosis is, what is the cause of that illness? Is it environmentally based? Is it genetically based? Is it something that they ingested? So we ask them to start thinking about what the cause is. Then in these particular cases, what if the cause has something to do with the environment or the larger society, then what is it that we need to do in the society? And how much will that cost? And how much will it cost to help this child get better? And how will we weigh the relative costs of the individual against the society and changes in the environment? So that the problems continue to layer and become more and more complex. And soon the students realize there are lots of trade-offs that they have to make for that. We ask students to debate issues, both locally from their community, something within their classroom, or something around the world. In mathematics, we ask students to extrapolate, write their own problems. We ask them to take what's mathematic principles and apply them to other fields. Mathematics principles and statistics, and how does that apply to sociological studies? For instance, do we take statistics and move that into what does that mean around global food supply? What does that mean around implications for countries, for gross domestic product? We're continually always doing layering in one after the other. The things I've just described to you are actually our 5 pillars of our courses: advancement with enrichment, evidence-based instructional strategies that we have just talked about, a focus on conceptual understanding rather than rote understanding, a constructivist approach where students are developing through their own learning process, and relevance, and a developmental interaction with the world and their environment.
Thank you very much, Dr. Roach. So the social issues and also very complex issues since childhood, having them think about that is very important. I think I understand what you're saying. There's another question that we've received. So Even if a child is diagnosed as an advanced learner but has low self-esteem, is there anything particular that parents and teachers should be mindful of when dealing with such a child?
Absolutely. You know, first of all, one of the things that we should be very clear about is students who have a great deal of academic progress in our society. Research has shown that they are no more prone to have any psychological concerns or mental disorders than the general population. But there are some things that are tendencies for some children with academic promise. One is the imposter syndrome. And that is students actually don't believe in their own advanced talent. So they ascribe what they do and how they learn to luck instead of the fact that they have the ability to do this work. They also may have perfectionist tendencies. And this is born out of the fact that they always have the right answer. So they become fearful about what happens if they make a mistake. That would ruin their own persona. Either one of these phenomena can leave a child with a sense of low self-worth and impact their sense of self-esteem. So what we ask parents and teachers to do is, first of all, talk about and provide opportunities where learning is fun, not graded, so that students don't feel like they have to keep pushing toward the imperative 100%. We also think about how do we provide assignments where there's no one right answer. So students are first reaffirmed for their answer and then asked to explain it. So that also gives students a way to show and demonstrate what they know and how they think, rather than feeling that it is an all or nothing proposition. We also try setting examples that demonstrate by the adults in the environment, either the parents or the teachers, that no one is perfect and we all make mistakes. And even the greatest minds in history have made errors. And in that helps them to reground themselves in that we are all only human, nobody is perfect, and we all make mistakes. And in fact, mistakes are a learning process. And some of the best colossal mistakes give us the best learning. We also provide lots of opportunities for students, or they should be providing lots of opportunities for students to engage in non-academic activities as well, so that students develop a well-rounded sense of themselves and their own identity. So we encourage families to have their students engaged in sporting events, cultural events, artistic events, to allow students to nurture and grow a variety of aspects of their personality and not just the academic focus. And in that way, we can help students feel very good about the whole facet of themselves and not think that their entire identity is wrapped up in getting one answer right or wrong.
ありがとうございます。親は
Thank you very much. Yes, parents are not really perfect and don't just focus on the academic study. Thank you very much. And very shortly, if you can give us a brief answer, the advanced learner, how do we deal with advanced learner in early childhood? And at what age do advanced learners suddenly face difficulty, typically?
In early childhood, the best way to provide support for advanced learners is to provide them lots of materials that they can interact with and engage in. And don't be limited only to what you think a typical 2-year-old might like or a typical 3-year-old. It's extremely important for students who particularly have advanced talent in language not to speak down to them, but to use adult sophisticated language with those children. And in that context, you also want to help them be engaged with other children, both their age and maybe a little bit older. But because we do need to keep in mind that these children, while they may have advanced academics and be able to understand and learn at advanced ages, they still may be chronologically, socially, and emotionally right at the age that they are. So one of the things is to help others around the child understand that it's okay to be a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old, and help to translate that for others who may assume that a child is much older than they are because of the language that they use or the sophistication of their speech.
なるほど。ありがとうございました。その年齢に適したなんていうの、ビヘイビアもあるけれども、
I understand. So it sounds like we need to have an understanding that advanced learners have some behaviors that are different from their age, but in some ways they're also a part of that peer group. So thank you again for your presentation, and thank you for staying with us for the Q&A. I'd like to close the Q&A for now since it is time for our next section. We'd like to move on to our panel discussion with parents of advanced learners. We will have a Q&A session as well later on. Questions will be accepted on the Slido, so please go to it from the QR code. And now this section will be moderated by Lin-san. Thank you very much. Virginia's presentation was extremely interesting for me as well. And now I'd like to welcome parents of advanced learners. And Virginia will be joining us again at 10, so we would like to continue with our Q&A session there. We have now joining us three parents of advanced learner children. From Education Beyond, our board member, Paul Lee. From Hong Kong joining us is Satoshi Ueyama. Perhaps Hong Kong is as hot as Tokyo today. And then joining us from Tokyo is Koko Yutaka. Thank you again. We will now be starting our panel discussion. And Paul-san, you spoke earlier about your son. And Satoshi and Koko are joining us now for the first time. So if we could ask you, when did you realize that your child might be a little bit different, perhaps an advanced learner? If there's any kind of specific thing that made you realize your child might be different, if you could share with us. So Satoshi-san, please. Yes, hello, thank you. I run an investment company in Hong Kong. My name is Satoshi Ueyama. So today I think I'll be talking about myself and also my child. So I've been working in Hong Kong for a long time. For my education, I was basically going through the Japanese educational system from elementary school all the way to high school. I went to public schools, local schools, but ever since I was a child, I really did not do well at school. I didn't understand it back then, but now, as an adult, having heard all of this information, I most likely had an advanced learner profile, very similar to what has already been discussed. And I think that's why school was so painful for me. When I was a child, I had a very big gap between what I did well and where I was weak in. So for academic studies, I was very well developed, but in terms of my social skills, I lagged far behind my peers. So for me, it was very difficult to just sit in the classroom and not say anything and listen to the teacher, or act in groups and kind of read the atmosphere. So school was very difficult for me. The teachers would see me as being, okay, you excel in one area, but in the other areas, you don't do well, so maybe you're not taking it seriously. Therefore, the teachers did not think highly of me as a student. If I had had the kind of support that is offered at CTY or maybe something at Education Beyond, then I think it would have been very different for me. However, it was different in the old days, so in any case, school was always very painful for me. But as I grew older, you start to have more options, and you also acquire more social skills. So I think I'm a self-sufficient human being, and I'm a productive member of society now. So you're saying that you yourself was an advanced learner. Yes. Now, until I became a parent myself, I had forgotten about my own childhood experience. And my experience, I thought, had to do with issues with my family, with society at that time. So I never thought that the problem originated with my own characteristics. But when my eldest son started elementary school, and even when he was small, I will say that he had a lot of academic promise. But when he was in maybe the 5th or 6th grade, I realized that it was almost a shock to me. He would have problems at school that were very similar to my own problems. So we would have meetings with the parent, and the feedback from the teachers was very similar to what I was told when I was going to school. So my son gets good grades in STEM disciplines, but he's socially not adept. He doesn't get along with his friends. He doesn't respect the teacher. So I was hearing all this from the school, and I guess he was a chip off the old block. We shared the same DNA. The left brain development and the right brain development, there was just a very big gap, and it was a struggle for him. We wanted to understand his unique characteristics and deal with him in the right way for his particular traits. Now he's in high school, and he continues to show that particular profile. Even now, his strengths and his weaknesses, there's a very big disparity. So in one area, his development has been very advanced, whereas in other areas, his development is taking a really long time. And one more thing that I'd like to add, I have 3 children. And it's not as if all 3 of my children are the same. All 3 have very different, unique characteristics. So I definitely think that different children show different traits. Thank you very much, Satoshi-san. So you had your own experience, and when you saw that your oldest son exhibited things that were similar to you, I think maybe for your son, it was very fortunate that because of your own experience, you as a parent realized those traits early on. And later on, we'd like to ask what kind of education you pursued based on that. But before we go to that, I'd like to turn it over to Coco-san. So Coco, I understand that your sons are pretty grown up now, but if you could tell us some things that you experienced with your second son when he was growing up. Yes, I will be talking about my second son. When he was in kindergarten, he went to a Montessori kindergarten, so he was really good at making maps, doing embroidery and knitting. He was very dexterous. He finished reading the Harry Potter series when he was in 1st grade of elementary school, so he's really very active. But after he got into maybe 3rd or 4th grade, he started to be very clear that he didn't want to be just a very good student, a good kid. He was maybe a little bit jaded. He started to lose interest in school studies when he was in the 5th grade. My eldest son is 5 years older, so he was already in high school. And he really liked board games. So we would, as a family, sit down and do board games or poker every night. And we discovered that my second son was really bright. Every time my son brought in a new board game, my second son would understand all of the rules and even how to win, what not to do, all of these really important things. So he would ask all the right questions, and then he would end up winning at all of these games. He understood the game within a matter of like minutes. We used to do Texas Hold'em, and he wanted to go to the national championship. So we took him to the regional Kanto championship, and in the junior section, he was 3rd place. he was able to really read ahead and kind of calculate ahead of time what would happen in the game. He was a very sharp and quick thinker, and he was also able to make very bold decisions. So we saw that he had this, but that never directly translated into good grades at school. So I never thought he was an advanced learner. And even now, to be honest, I'm not sure he really is, but someone who knew my second son thought that he might be an advanced learner.
大会っていうのは何年生までが対象だった
The poker, what is the age group? Well, up to high school is the junior segment. And he was in elementary school. Yes, he was a fifth grader when he became, he came in third, which means that that's a big characteristic. So he has great capabilities in certain areas. Yes, thank you very much. So it's really great to hear these actual examples. And so if your child has such features, what kind of schools would be good, or what kind of programs did you select? I would like to ask Satoshi-san as well as Paul about what schools or programs did you select for your child? Well, then, if I may start. So my children is in the second year of high school, third year of junior high school, and first year of junior high school. So I actually struggled in the public and formal school system. I didn't want my children to go through the same kind of difficulties. And so my children grew up abroad, and they went to a Montessori school for kindergarten and elementary school. So that's what I selected for my children. So a more flexible education so that children's curiosity could be developed further. So Paul-san, what about your child?
When the oldest son started, we actually started similarly with the Japanese education. From a very early age, we found that perhaps he wanted to do more than just following the instructions of the teachers. And so in order to give him some more freedom and flexibility, we moved him to the British school in Tokyo. And ever since then, he's been following the British education. But as I was talking about earlier, that flexibility eventually was not enough for him. And so at 12 years old, he decided that that's not what he wanted anymore. He's studying in the US boarding school now. He's very happy. But that was sort of the history of what he's been through from Japanese to British and eventually to American style education.
ありがとうございます。そういう意味では、日本の中でちょっといろいろ苦しい。
So it means that he struggled here in Japan, and in the British school also, it didn't really give him enough flexibility, and now he is in a boarding school in the United States. And in the United States, not all schools are like that, but probably he selected a school, or he found a school that really fit him. And as a parent, thinking about which school is best for the child, I believe that's the journey that you went through. Thank you. What about Koko-san? What did you think about school selection? I think your child had to take some entrance exams for schools. Well, yes. As a parent, we have been thinking about that all along, but he went to a public elementary school. I wanted him to go to a private junior high school, so I sent him to cram school. But in fifth grade, he suddenly said that he didn't want to go. He wanted to go to a public junior high school with his best friend. So if I thought that this is not something that I can push on him. And so he quit cram school and he decided not to take an entrance exam. In the end, he took an entrance exam to get into a national junior high school, but there were a lot of struggles and he didn't want to go to school. There were times and many mornings that he couldn't get up to go to school. And as a parent from early childhood, I was trying to provide all kinds of environments for him. Providing books and things that might stimulate his curiosity. But I wasn't able to find the program that fit him. Well, your child was reading Harry Potter from grade 1, so you have tried a lot of things at your home to stimulate his curiosity. So thank you very much. We only have 5 minutes left, but lastly, Paul and Satoshi-san, you both went to CTY programs, and if you can explain a little bit about that experience, how is it different from ordinary cram schools? I believe that's the question many people will have. So what's good about the CTY program? What was the difference with other programs? And then after that, for Koko-san, your child is now grown up and he didn't go to CTY, but can you tell us about what would you have liked to have had as a support when you were going through all these struggles? So Paul-san, Satoshi-san, please.
So I guess there are two very important differences that I feel looking at my own son that CTY offers us differently. And the first point is what Virginia was talking about, is the fact that you are able to meet with the people who are like-minded, very interested in a similar topic. And the reason why this is so important is because for the first time, I think when my son went to school, he doesn't feel weird anymore. He's not the only one that is thinking about this and wanting to talk about it. And when everyone else would be looking at him and said, why do you want to talk about this, right? And so that's, I think, the very, very important experience for him to gain confidence and self-esteem. And the second difference is that is CTY, you don't learn it in a very structured way that the typical school gives you. One of the courses that my son really enjoyed was Catching the Criminals, for example. In that course, you do not just learn one single subject. You learn about biology, which is how to look at blood, how to analyze it. You learn about logic reasoning by thinking about laws. You try to combine everything that you were learning at the end by solving a case. That's not a typical way of actually learning in most other schools. You take repeated worksheets, you take exams, and that's very boring for advanced learners. And so I think those experiences are what really made him want to go back to the US eventually.
ありがとうございます。先ほどのね、バージニアさんの5ピラーってありま
Yes,
す。
the 5 pillars Virginia talked about is exactly what you're saying. Now, Satoshi-san, what about your case? Well, CTY, before COVID-19, there was a program offered in Hong Kong, and that's where my child went. Especially my eldest son took cryptography and also personal computer programming, and especially the coding was really interesting for him. It's a computer science topic, but within the course, no computer was being used. He was given paper to make a craft, to make a coding machine, to understand the mechanics behind it. And he had to do a lot of calculation manually in order to create these codes. And so he had to take these steps. And in the end, actually, the system is being used in e-commerce, the RSA encryption. That's exactly what he went through. And he was taught about how this is being used in actual society. So that was the kind of learning he went through. So you use your hands, you learn the basic principles, and then as you go along, you learn more things. And so it's a well thought about course. And the CTY course, you can say that by taking part, it's not as if it's going to be useful for taking entrance exams or your grades at school will get better. The Catching the Criminal case is the same. You will understand this very complex system out in society. You think through this that system, and there are approaches to think about them. So you can learn in steps. The child can learn in steps and build up a lot of success through that challenge. And then you can understand how that learning is related to the actual society. I think that's the way the programs are made. And I would like to recommend CTY programs to many people.
Thank you very much. I think Virginia said it's not about the what, it's why or how, to really understand that. And then also have the relevance to tie it to real world issues. I think that's something very critical to maintaining and nurturing the curiosity and interests of the advanced learners. I know that we're actually going a little bit past our schedule, but I'd like to ask Coco to speak briefly about what she wished she knew as a parent earlier for her child. One thing is, if there are children who might be advanced learners, then what is the information that parents would be able to rely on? I think that would have been helpful for me, because then I wouldn't have thought my son was just being lazy. Rather, I would have had a better understanding of why he didn't feel engaged. And there are certain talents and skills that can't be measured in traditional school grades. How do you identify those skills, and then how do you nurture those skills? I think it would have been great if we had found a place to do that. Yes, I think about the first point that you mentioned. For parents, it's important, but I think it's also important for educators. So adults who are interacting with these children, they need to understand the unique characteristics of these children. I think it's important for them to understand why they behave in that way. We really want to create a society where that is done. Education Beyond has just been launched, but we really are hoping to aim to create a society where that is possible. So thank you, Coco. Thank you, all three parents. And I would like to ask Virginia to again join us. And also ask Michael, one of our other board members, to join us, because we have been getting a lot of questions. At least 30 questions have been sent in. I don't think we will be able to cover them all, but I definitely want to cover as many as we can. So please, let's bear in mind, we have only 30 minutes, so please keep your answers brief. The first one here, regarding advanced learners, it's not very well known. Typical parents don't know about advanced learners. So what do we need to be mindful of to promote a better understanding of advanced learners? I think that's actually a pretty difficult question. Maybe I'll ask Michael-san to start, please. Thank you very much, Lin-san. I think what Yutaka-san and Lin-san were talking about earlier, I think this is actually that point exactly. We're looking to create a community for advanced learners. What are the unique characteristics of advanced learner children? How do we understand those traits better so that we develop the self-esteem of these children? How do we get support from others around us? As we heard earlier from Virginia-san, there are certain ways that advanced learners function. So they're not being lazy by not following all of the typical steps. We just want to have a better understanding of how they function so that we can explain why they are the way they are. If we could develop a community of parents, of supporters, and we're all sharing examples and anecdotals, use those as guidance for us to further develop Education Beyond. Yes, thank you very much. And also, Virginia, if I may ask you, in the US, I think for 40 years now, this issue has been discussed and researched, so there's already a lot of discourse. Maybe 40 years ago, the situation was like Japan, but how has the situation advanced these students changed in the US? Do you have any advice for us as parents and also our institute?
So one of the things I think is helpful in the US is because we have started organizing parents and educators to support students with advanced talent, there is an advocacy group. So parents can help support other parents. And I think that that has been really important as parents seek services. When we started as an organization, one of the primary functions that we had was identifying through our assessments students with advanced talent so that parents could go back to the school and say, look, my child has certain educational needs. One of the other things I think is helpful is as parents talk to one another, even in your conversation today, you have given other people some common things to look for in your children. And one of the biggest things of advice I would give to parents is when your child at a young age is in a setting with other children, sit back and watch what your child does very, very carefully. Because the things that your child does that may be different than other children, as our panelists said, are the very things that indicate that that child is learning at a different rate or very interested in something else. You can also think about what kinds of jokes do the children ask, because jokes actually often reflect sophisticated understanding of your environment. So it's in those kind of everyday ways that you can understand your child more so that you can explain it to the people at school and that you can start to understand across other families what they are looking for and what they are seeing too.
ありがとうございます。そういう意味では、ペアレンツ、保護者の方とか、教育者の。
Thank you very much. I think parents, basically building communities and advocacy is very different. And then identifying which children have those skills. So you have an assessment, and that gives parents the tools with which to go back to their own schools to talk. So I think what you said right now about observing, really carefully observing your child is very helpful as a tip. Next question that has come in. So if our only option is to go to a Japanese public school system, then what kind of path would you recommend? I think this question is for Coco because I know your children go to a national school system. So in addition to choosing the school, if you could tell us about what you think is lacking in these schools. So from kindergarten to maybe around second grade, we basically did a lot of books. So we gave my son a lot of books, did a lot of reading, and then also we did a lot with the Kapla blocks, Legos, all of the blocks that are said to be good for children. We did that a lot, definitely. And we would just let our son do it as much as he wanted. My husband actually made this big board where he could just do blocks as much as he wanted on that. We didn't want to force him to learn English, so we tried a little bit of English conversation at home, and we did some English conversational classes. That didn't really last or stick, but whatever a parent can do to intellectually develop your child, we would, offer that. But sometimes he would take it, other times he wouldn't. It wasn't always something that he would accept, but I definitely tried a lot of things. And sports, soccer, piano, swimming lessons, whatever he was interested in, I tried to give him the opportunity. Yes, so I live in Karuizawa in Nagano. It's in the countryside, so there aren't public schools are really the only option. There aren't many Montessori or international schools for elementary school kids. And that means it's up to the parents. So we would amass a lot of encyclopedias and just make sure that they were always visible and in front of our children. So if there's no bookstore nearby, I will say now living in the age of the internet, there's still a way to get a lot of literature. And I'd like to go to the next question here now. School classes are too boring, but to say that sounds like you're showing off. So they don't want to say this. My son is often saying that I can't say this, but I think that the class is a waste of time. So Paul-san, can you answer that?
It's very difficult when the child is not happy with the school. What I will offer, though, is our own personal experience, both me and my wife, is that whenever we hear this complaint over and over again, we try to provide all kinds of different solutions on our own. And we would say, why don't you do this? Why don't you study that? Why don't you play this and that? And I think we learned after he dropped out of school, one day he told us that, you know, all those times that I told you about that, all I wanted you to do is to listen. I just wanted to know that you understand what I'm feeling. I don't necessarily expect you to give me an answer. I just want to know someone understand how I feel. And so I think that that's the first important point, which is that when that happens, you make sure that the child understand that you feel the same feeling for him, then he can move on and he can feel better, and then we can look for the next solution. So I think that's a very, very important lesson that we learn from our child. So I'd like to offer that today.
ありがとうございます。どうしても親としてね、子育てしてあげなきゃって思う。
Rather than thinking that you're going to nurture the child, that you need to give them an answer, rather than that, just listening to the child, to understand the child, I believe that's what they really want. I think Virginia also said observation, to understand the child is very important. I think it's closely linked to what she said. And there are many more questions coming in. So advanced learner and also the cram schools, and there are children who are advanced because they are learning in cram schools. But what is the difference between these children and advanced learners? So cram schools to prepare for the entrance exams, and they excel in study. But how are they different from the advanced learners? If I can ask this question to Virginia, please.
So one of the things I would say about the cram schools is the cram schools are taking a very specific piece of curriculum, and the students are learning that curriculum. That does not necessarily mean that they can think in new and innovative ways or beyond that curriculum. And often what we see is when students study and learn that way, once they take the test, they forget it, because it doesn't have any relevance or meaning to them, and they don't have any other ways in which they have explored that or used that information in another way, in a more sophisticated way. So that's actually one of the things that programs that really focus on the needs of advanced learners are trying to do, is to keep them moving along that level, that cognitive sophistication hierarchy that I showed in my slide deck. Keep pushing them much farther down to the abstract levels of learning. That kind of cram school is really stopping at about the third level. I gave a mathematics example, but I could give you numerous examples across all the disciplines. And what students with advanced talent, when they're starting at the third level, they certainly don't need to stay at the third level, and they get frustrated when it's at the third level because it has no meaning. They forget it.
なるほど。私も中学、高校、大学と受験をして。
Yes, I suddenly realized that I forgot everything that I've learned in junior high school, and university. Yes, there might be advanced learners among the children who go to cram school, but the purpose of learning and studying, and also the style or the structure of learning, is totally different. So for advanced learners, I believe you need to go through the steps as Virginia explained earlier, because that will make the child go through that process even after they graduate from school. So thank you very much. And moving on to the next question. This is from a school teacher in a public school setting. And this person says that he also sees some advanced learners in the school and he wants to bring out the potential. So how can that be done? What can public school teachers do for advanced learners? What kind of teachers would make advanced learners happy? So this is a question I believe that which should go to Virginia, please.
So one of the most basic premises that I try to share with teachers is when you have a class of students, you have students at a variety of different stages in their development and capacity. But if we know from research that if the teacher asks cognitively sophisticated questions, the students with advanced talent will certainly be able to answer those questions, but what we also find is other students who are more typically developing actually tend to be more sophisticated in their responses too. So if teachers can really very consciously, rather than asking very basic descriptive questions or recall questions, to be very cognitively sophisticated in their questioning, we know from research that not only meets the needs of the higher end students in terms of their cognitive potential, but it pulls everybody up as well.
なるほど。これはそういう質問の仕方というのは、
So there are ways to question that, and I believe CTY is teaching teachers how to pose such questions, maybe through training sessions.
Yes, we provide professional development to teachers, and we actually talk to them about cognitively sophisticated questioning. And then we have been immersing those teachers into a virtual classroom. So the teacher then has to practice asking those kinds of questions with a group of students who have advanced talent. So you can imagine there's always one of the students who's raising their hand saying, I know. There's another student who starts to answer a question that's completely different than what the teacher asked. And there'll be another student who says, well, I know about that, but let me tell you lots of other things that I know about that. And what we do is we help the teacher and create a guiding sequence of questioning so that students stay on content, but move in a more sophisticated way. But we actually have them practice. And in the virtual classroom, the students are avatars that are being manipulated by teachers on the back end.
なるほど。そういう意味では、こういうふうに質問をするって、
So cognitive, conceptual questions, but it's very difficult to practice asking such questions. So the teachers have to understand what kind of questions they are. And so having this practice session is very good, I believe. And I think Education Beyond would like to do something like that for teachers in Japan, to have this interaction with teachers to understand and better train teachers to deal with advanced learners. Now, the next question. My parents are Japanese, and of course my house is a Japanese environment, but if we use English, would this pose a problem for the child in learning? Paul-san, if you can answer this question.
私はまさにこの環境で
Satoshi-san, excuse me. Well, just like the questioner, of course, me and my wife are Japanese, and well, we only have 3 samples, my 3 children, but so far I don't think we have any problems, even if the studying language is English. I'm not really sure because I'm not a specialist. Well, yes, and it may depend upon the child. The next question. About the cost. So today this is an advocacy session, but at the very end, well, on July 17th, we will have an explanation about a pilot project here in Japan. We will give details on that date. And I believe that we can explain about the cost there. And Hattori-san will make the announcement later at the end. So HC, my child likes quiet environments. Even if a child is an advanced learner, you have to follow instructions at school. How can we provide an environment where the child can safely learn? We have homeschooling as well as are there schools for advanced learners here in Japan? There are some online classes, and Virginia, maybe advanced learners can go on online courses that are offered in the United States. Are there such possibilities?
CTY offers a full range of courses that are online, and they are offered to students around the world. And we can do that in two ways. One is we offer courses where the course is asynchronous. That is, material is being presented to the student is working through the material, and then the teacher is looking at it at another time. And then the student and the teacher meet once a week to talk about their progress through the class. So that's one of the ways we do that. Another way is when we have courses that are offered that can fit the Japan time. So it's an evening course for the students in the United States. It's a morning course for the students in Japan. And those classes provide opportunity for students to meet once, twice, or depending on how we're offering the course, 3 times a week in person, with doing other activities outside of the class to continue the progress.
ありがとうございます。センターフォーターネテリウスさんのウェブサイトをご覧いただくと、今、バージニアさんが。
Thank you very much. So if you actually go to the CTY website, then there will be more information on these classes currently offered in English. So please check out their website. And in Japan, we have a kind of a hybrid model where we have a teacher from CTY from the US, and then provide a classroom here in Japan. We're actually planning on such a program, so Ayako-san will be explaining this at the very end. And now going on to our next question. So, are there advanced learners who learn very quickly but also like school? My child does very well in academic skill tests, but also enjoys schools. So, is my child not an advanced learner because of that? Virginia-san, I saw you smile. Could you answer?
We have many advanced learners who love school. They love to see their friends at school. They love to play on the playground. These are children, particularly when they get into the middle school years, they're more interested in their friends than they are their family. And that's where they are. So we have many children who go to school, and they have both their academic needs met as well as their social needs met. They still, a 12-year-old is a 12-year-old, right? And they have particular interests outside of what they're learning that other 12-year-olds have too. So while there are particular issues and ways of learning that students with advanced talent have, it doesn't mean that they don't have a social life and environment. The issues that thwart students with advanced talent socially have more to do with the mismatch between the curriculum in the school than it has to do with their peers.
ありがとうございます。学校に馴染めるっていろんな意味があると思うんですけども、お友達がたくさんいて楽しい給食の時間と部活と。
Thank you very much for that. So that even if you like school, that doesn't mean that your child is not an advanced learner, because I'm sure it's fun to have lunch with your friends, meet with them, but I understand that the school curriculum and a mismatch with that is more often the case, the social issues. So 2E, twice exceptional. That means developmental issues on the developmental spectrum, but also high IQ. So is a CTY program intended for children like that? So a question for you again, Virginia?
Absolutely. And actually, my son is twice exceptional. So he has a significant learning disability, but also very strong academic promise and achievement. We are very focused at CTY on making sure that we uncover children with advanced talent who may have other learning disabilities and tailor their needs in our classrooms. These students are actually in a typical school, very hard to identify. Because they learn so quickly, they often can mask their disability and they present as a typically learning child. So my own son when he was tested, he tested in his verbal acuity as a 15-year-old when he was 5.
Wow.
And yet his performance acuity tested as someone who had a cognitive disability. So part of it is to help the teachers understand what the student might need and to provide opportunities to explain and translate for teachers who may not understand that phenomenon. Because again, if a student can get by, then what happens is they just get by. And that becomes very frustrating for them too. And they end up, the student in the back of the class, staring out the window and eventually not going to school at all.
ありがとうございます。CTY では、twice exceptional のお子さんも含めて、
CTY has programs for 2E, twice exceptional children. And I think it really depends on whether you have a good curriculum, a good program that's based on in-depth research. Thank you for that answer. And I think maybe we'll do the next question. So where can we get an evaluation assessment in Japan? CTY uses a SCAT, S-C-A-T. So it's not like an assessment, but it's basically a test. We can actually talk more about this in our next event on July 17th. So if you'd like to take this assessment in Japan, then please do attend our July 17th event. So yes, we will definitely provide more information on that. Our next question, I think, is probably from an active teacher. Project-based learning and exploratory learning, are those good fits for advanced learners? I think this was kind of already covered by Virginia's earlier response. When you do project-based learning or explorative learning, it's important to make sure that the 5 key pillars are touched upon. It's not like you set up everything to be a project or you make everything exploratory. You need to have the structure that's based on evidence. That's something that we would like to work on with CTY and introduce educational methods that have evidence-based strategies in Japan. So we're hoping to partner with CTY to do that. And the next question is also a very specific. So can non-CTY children attend the CTY summer program? I'm trying to understand the purpose of the question. Is this a CTY program in Japan? So if you're a non-CTY student, so non-CTY, CTY offers a screening assessment called SCAT, and if you meet the right requirement, then you become a CTYer. And if you are a CTYer, you can actually take part in the pilot program in Japan, and you can also go to the US-based programs. And then the next question. Oh, excuse me, it's actually already 10:28. I failed to recognize the timekeeping messages, so thank you again for all of these many questions. It was easy for me to get carried away, and it's already 10:30 now. We've received so many questions. We weren't able to cover every single one. We do have another follow-up event, so if I can turn it over to our MC, Ayako-san, who will wrap it up, we will introduce our next online event, and hopefully we will get great attendance for that. So thank you very much to Dr. Virginia Roach and our panelists. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. And I apologize for going over. Thank you very much to our panelists. Again, thank you very much for the many questions from the audience. We would like to cover some more questions in our next online event, if we may. And lastly, we would like to talk about education beyond upcoming activities. As you can see here on the screen, on July 17th, Sunday from 9 to 10:30, we will have our next online event. Education Beyond and CTY are planning from January to March in 2023 a pilot program for students in 2nd grade through 6th grade. This is currently being planned for Tokyo. So in the next online event, we will share details about the pilot program and how to apply. The question earlier about the cost and the scholarship, we will be sharing more information pertaining to that question then. To take part in this online event, please apply through the registration form. The registration form link is currently in the Zoom chat. You can also go to the registration form from the QR code on the screen. We look forward to your participation. We also will be sharing report outs and activities for upcoming events on our Facebook page. So please follow us on Facebook through the QR code or through the URL on the chat. As we look to expand Education Beyond's activities, we would like to recruit pro bono members. If you are interested in supporting us, please apply through the QR code. We will contact you from our HR person once we have more information about the extra additional positions. Thank you again for taking part and sharing time with us on your Sunday morning. If we could ask you to take part in this survey to help us in our future activities. So please access the survey through this QR code. And that concludes our event. Please exit. At this point, thank you very much for your time. There may have been some glitches as we are supporting the event voluntarily, but we do hope that you will continue to support Education Beyond. This was our first ever online event. Thank you very much to everyone in the audience for attending.
Hi. これにてイベントはすべて終了となります。
That concludes our event. Please leave the Zoom from the exit button on the right. Thank you.